Do you want me to? It's up to you, whatever you want.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for your patience with the settling in process. There was a big crowd today, and it's so great that all of you left the beautiful weather outside to come in for an extreme weather program. But no surprise, because the presenter is Harvey Leonard, who I think is well known to everybody. But just to give you a quick little bio about Harvey, as you all know, he's a Chief Meteorologist Emeritus with Channel 5. And he has a 50-year career in meteorology, and 45 of those years were with forecasting weather in New England, and 20 of those were at WCVB Channel 5. Harvey retired in 2022, but he is busy in his new position as in his emeritus role, and he serves the community with important information, with periodic contributions to Channel 5, storm team coverage, and engaging in community speaking presentations like today. So please join me in a warm welcome for Harvey Leonard.
Thank you so much, and thanks to all of you for coming out in this brutal weather. And no, it's been quite an amazing stretch. It's kind of interesting. I guess I should mention that a little bit. There was at one point during the last couple of months where Boston had gone 29 days without a drop of rain, which is the fourth longest stretch. And it has continued on the dry side since. So that's definitely doesn't happen that often, which of course begs the question, the obvious question: is this normal? Is this natural? Is this climate change? Is it partly due to climate change? And not just our spell of weather, but of course we know there were two major hurricanes hitting Florida recently, Helene and Milton, within the span of 2 weeks, and all the way into October to have hurricanes that strong. You know, hurricane season does technically go to November 30th, but the peak of the season is, if you go for one date, it would be like September 10th. So if you were imagining like a bell-shaped curve, it would peak at September 10th. It would begin around June 1st and end November 30th. But normally, major hurricanes become less likely as you get toward the latter part of the period. But the ocean water temperatures in the Gulf of Mexico, and really ocean water temperatures in much of the world, are running several degrees warmer than normal, and that gives added energy for these storms. So they don't cause the storm to form, but they contribute to making the storms even stronger or more intense than they otherwise might have been. And that's the real connection to climate change. Now, what I'm going to do today is a little bit different, okay? So I'm going to mix climate change into the talk, but I'm not going to actually give the talk specifically about climate change. But I know there'll be plenty of time for Q&A, and also I want to see, you know, how long this takes. We'll see where we are. We'll see how many of us are still awake. That's not due to you being sleepy. That's in case I'm boring. And we'll see where we are. So what I wanted to talk about today, you already saw a glimpse of it, this particular upcoming winter is a 10-year anniversary of the snowiest winter we have ever had in Boston. That was the winter of 2014-2015. Now, it is perfectly fine if you do not. I'm just curious how many of you either remember or are aware of that particular winter. Okay, so most of you are. Good memories, that's excellent. Okay, well, I was still working during the course of that winter. And when that winter was over, with the help of an intern that I had at the time, who I believe is our kind of emergency pinch hitter on the air now. He's on the air once in a while. His name is Michael Page. He helped me put together this presentation, which kind of reminds us of what that winter was like. So I wanted to go through that, and then as we go through that or complete that, I'll then try to tie in the topic of climate change. Does that sound fair? You're easy. Okay. Anyway, so let me punch that back up, and we should be good to go. Wow. Just the memory of that winter is causing the lights to go crazy. Okay. So, all right, so here we go. So we gave this a title, Buried in Boston. That was my idea. The winter of 2014-15. And I actually presented this at a national conference, and I think I did that in June of 2015. So every year, there's a broadcast meteorology conference in a different part of the country every year. And many of the television and radio meteorologists go to these conferences, conventions. And so I thought it might be an interesting idea to do this presentation. So I actually did it there. So as we go through this, I'll be adding on information as we go, and you'll be refreshed as to what took place. Okay. First of all, we remember it for the snow, but those 2 months of February and March in 2015, okay, turned out to be the coldest February-March combination that we had ever had. So this was not just intense snow. This was intense cold. Now notice the months are February and March, all right? I want you to be aware that as meteorologists, we consider meteorological winter to be December, January, and February, because those are the 3 coldest months of the year. So this says February and March. December and the first 2/3 of January were not cold and were not snowy. But I don't think many of us would remember that when we look back at that winter. We're just going to remember that, oh my gosh, there was just an insane amount of snow, and it was so cold, and the snow was there for quite a while. But it happened in the second half of what we call meteorological winter. So a little mini story, a little behind-the-scenes story with that. So Channel 5, which it was and is a great place to work, it's a terrific station. It's what we call a legacy station. It has a long, terrific legacy of having a great news product, a lot of wonderful people on the air. That also implies, and is true, good management, good ownership. It's owned by Hearst Corporation. And the anchor team that I was working with, the last good number of years there, they're still there, the number 1 anchor team in the evening, and that's Ed Harding and Maria Stefanos. Well, if you watch that with some regularity, you know they're both excellent. And Ed is he can be funny at times. He's a very chatty guy, very outgoing personality. So during the course of December, of 2014, and the first half of January 2015, off the air, he kept saying, Harv, it's going to be a nothing winter. I'm telling you, it's going to be a nothing winter, okay? I didn't say anything. Then, once we got to late January, something very unusual happened. I don't think it's happened since. Ed got quiet. Okay? Now, this was all off camera anyway, so it was nothing that was ever seen, on camera. And I have to be honest. I wasn't anticipating this. Okay? So I can't say, I knew the second half of the winter would be record-breaking. No, I wasn't able to determine that. I don't think anybody was. Okay? So that's just a little backdrop. Okay, so record cold in Boston for the 3-month period, January, February, and March, even though the first half of January was pretty mild, but the January, February, March combination came in tied for 3rd place, averaging 26.3 degrees. All right? Now, this is what's remarkable. This is for Boston. Okay? Before January 23rd, 5.5 inches of snow had accumulated in Boston. That is significantly below normal. I don't think there was anyone imagining we're going to wind up with the snowiest winter ever in Boston at that time. There's one other point. I said I'm going to incorporate climate change into this, okay? And that is, as intense as that period was, from late January to mid-February in terms of snow, and from late January through most of March in terms of cold, it still wasn't what I would consider, and perhaps you would as well, an old-fashioned, traditional New England winter, one that starts to get cold around or just after Thanksgiving. Maybe we get our first snow. And if we do, think about it. If you're in early December, the days are short, the nights are long, the sun angle is poor. So if you're just normally cold from that point on and you've already got a snow cover, you may be keeping some of that snow cover all the way into March. Think of the last time you can remember something like that happening. I actually can't. So I think that's one of the things we're noticing. And this winter, okay, because you're going to say, well, if we're having climate change and we're getting warmer and all this, should be less snow. How do you explain, this winter? Well, again, it still wasn't a long, continuous winter. So what we may be seeing is getting intense winter periods occasionally within a winter still can happen. But getting long, continuous winters seems to be harder and harder to come by. I'm not saying it will never happen, but the idea of climate change is that going forward, it is likely that we will have more warmer than average winters than colder than average winters. It doesn't mean we will never have a cold winter. It doesn't mean we will never have very cold weather. Here's a great way I can kind of explain the difference between weather and climate, all right? And first, why do we even have weather in the first place? Well, the way our planet revolves around the sun, different parts of our planet are getting different amounts of solar radiation from the sun. So that creates temperature differences across the planet. Once you have temperature differences in physics, this is one of the simpler things of physics, temperature is directly proportionate to pressure. So if you have temperature differences, you're going to have pressure differences. You're going to have areas of higher pressure, areas of lower pressure. It's going to be colder in the higher latitudes, warmer closer to the equator. And so with these temperature differences, the Earth tries to achieve a balance. And the way that happens is by the cold trying to come south from the north and the warm air trying to come up from the south. And the two can often collide, and we call those fronts, separating warmer and colder air, boundaries. And along those fronts, your storms can form. And that's where you find most of your precipitation, okay? We are at such a latitude where often that battle zone between the warm and cold is waged somewhere near us. Could be a little bit north, then we can be on the warm side of storms. If the boundary is a little bit south, we're on the colder side of it, and it could mean in the winter, chances for snowstorms. If we're very cold, sometimes the boundary gets pushed so far south that we become cold and dry. All of these different kind of patterns can happen, do happen, have always happened, and it's all part of the general circulation of the atmosphere. So the statement I'm going to make now is true. Our climate has always been changing. That is true. There is what we call normal climatic variation. But the idea of what appears to be happening is to superimpose something on top of the already complex changing climate that we have. We know many different weather patterns that occur. Many of them are cyclical, and we're aware of those. But the climate scientists who've been studying this issue carefully, they're looking at everything, all different factors, not just the increase in greenhouse gases. They're looking at sunspot activity, Those have 11-year cycles, and they have some relationship to our weather. There are many different things, but they are unable to account for the recent decades of continuous, slowly but surely warming without including the effect of increased greenhouse gases, which tend to trap heat, okay? So that is the idea behind it all. Another way to look at it is take the general circulation of the atmosphere that gives us all these weather patterns, all right? We've had tropical storms and hurricanes forever, all right? They're not new. So if somebody says, oh, climate change caused that hurricane, wrong. A more responsible statement is that hurricane became stronger than it otherwise would have been because of climate change. The ocean waters are several degrees warmer than average. That is more energy, more fuel for these storms to allow them to become more intense, more extreme. And the weather extremes, those are the concerns, because that's what's costly to property and sometimes lives. And it isn't just the two hurricanes like we saw. There are heat waves, droughts, forest fires. Anything that is on the extreme end becomes problematic. That's why this is such an important issue. Another thing, this warming that we're noticing on average. You would think, take a day like today, great example. It's clear, it's sunny. Tonight, if it stays clear like last night was, we know what happens. We warm up during the day, we cool off at night. But the idea, because of the burning of coal, oil, and natural gas, putting more and more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which is it's a greenhouse gas. It tends to trap heat. So it means when we take solar radiation in during the day and our temperature goes up, and then at night with clear skies, especially with dry air, light winds, the heat of the day goes back out to space, we cool down. But with increased greenhouse gases, some of that heat going back out to space doesn't make it there. It gets trapped by the greenhouse gases at night. So if that theory is true, you would expect the warming that's occurring to be more pronounced at night than during the day. And that's exactly what we've seen. There's been a larger amount of warming at night than during the day, even though there's been a warming both day and night, okay? Another way to look at this, think of this, the increased greenhouse gases, okay? Think of that as taking the patterns that already exist and putting some of them on steroids, okay? That's the way, I think, to look at it, and then you'll be able to understand it more sensibly. A great example, in my opinion, of the difference between weather and climate. Beautiful day today, we're in an incredible stretch. And when we talk about today, tonight, tomorrow, maybe out to a week, that's all part of weather and a weather forecast. But when we talk about climate, we're talking about the average weather over a longer period of time, at least a month, maybe a year, maybe 10 years, maybe multiple decades, maybe a century, okay? So that's the way that we look at this whole thing. So the example I have for you is a year and a half ago, February 4th, 2023, on a Saturday. Boston, 10 below zero and windy, the coldest temperature in Boston since 1957. Wait a second. I thought we're getting warmer. How do we have the coldest temperature since 1957? No capiche. I'm not even Italian. But, okay? All right, how can that be? All right, well, that was February 4th, 2023, Saturday. The next day, Sunday, February 5th, 2023, I took a drive down to Norwell, and I was asked to give a talk at the James Library in Norwell. And the talk was to be on the blizzard of '78, because the very following day was going to be the 45-year anniversary of the blizzard of '78, okay? So I went down there, and of course it was indoors, but when I got there, it was 52 degrees. The day after 10 below zero. That's amazing, because cold air is heavier than warm air. It's more dense. It's harder to replace. And yet we had that turnaround so quickly. So there's no doubt that was a bitterly, but very short-lived, cold outbreak. That was, remember, the February 4th, that Saturday. So then the month comes to an end. And I look back, and the month averages between 2 and 3 degrees above normal. The climate shows a warming in spite of the weather on February 4th being bitterly cold. So always keep weather and climate in mind when you hear and see or read things about climate change. And I think that will help you to get a better assessment of what's truly going on. So that's always been one of my goals, even when I was doing forecasting day by day, I tried my best to put things in proper perspective and context, okay? All right, so that's how I said I'm gonna try to mix in the climate change with this incredible snowy winter. All right, so there it is. Before January 23rd, 5.5 inches of snow. And after January 23rd, 105.1 inches of snow, all right? That alone, I believe, would have put us in second place if there had been no snow until January 23rd. So you're basically getting the snowiest winter in really roughly half a winter, okay? That's pretty remarkable. Now, we're gonna get into all that. 4 unbelievable snowstorms in less than 3 weeks, all right? The first was January 26th and 27th. And if my recollection is correct, that was a very late Sunday night and Monday storm, I think. Because I think the Patriots won either the AFC Championship or the Super Bowl that Sunday, and I was at work because of the impending storm. But the first one was, in many ways, perhaps the worst one. I think it's the one that had the most wind, so it was a really strong nor'easter. Now, 2 feet of snow is a tremendous amount of snow, but there is a difference between getting 2 feet of, in general, light, dry, and fluffy snow, and getting 2 feet or even less, but heavy, wet snow. So the difference was, it was a cold snow up here, a relatively dry snow, not so as you got toward the Cape Cod Canal and the Cape. So they had bigger problems because they had power outages due to the heavy, wet snow. They had higher moisture content. All right, then the second one, look at that. It's only like, what, 5-6 days later? February 2nd, 16.2. February 7th through 9th, 23.1. So you're talking about 2 2-footers and 2 that were almost 1.5 feet, all in less than 3 weeks. And it stayed consistently cold throughout. So there was very little melting. But Boston never had 80 inches. If you add those 4, you get about 80 inches. Boston did not have 80 inches of snow on the ground. You might say, well, why not if it stayed so cold? Well, when it's cold, and let's say it's sunny, all right? First of all, what happens is some of the snow will actually melt due to the sun shining on it, but yet you won't realize it or see anything, or maybe not even see anything wet, because if it's very dry out, this snow, which is in a solid state, passes through the liquid state of water so fast into the gaseous state that you just don't see anything getting wet, and the snow pile looks a little bit lower, and you go, why is it lower? Nothing happened, didn't rain, never got warm. A great place is like Denver. You know, Denver can get 1 foot of snow one day, and the next day it could be like 50 degrees, sunny and very dry. Almost all the snow melts, and it never turns wet anywhere. The ground is dry. We call that sublimation, when you go from the solid state to the gaseous state almost instantaneously. So we didn't have 80 inches of snow on the ground, but we had an awful lot, and there you see it. So 4 major snowstorms in 3.5 weeks. I think it's actually within 3 weeks, but there you go. All right, now, In only 10 days, just taking into account the first two storms, just the first two, Boston had roughly 48 inches of snow. So that's more than the seasonal average, which is about 43 or 44. Okay, now another aside. All right, so when we talk about what's the average snowfall for Boston, and during this winter, the average was considered to be about 44. How do you get to that average? Well, you group decades, and you kind of go by a running average of 30 years at a time. So when you're looking at 2014-15, that winter, we would look at all of the winters between 1980 and 2010 and see what the average is. And that's what we say is Boston's average snowfall. Now, once we got past 2020, then instead of looking at 1980 to 2010, we jump ahead a decade. We go 1990 to 2020. Now, during that period of time, the average temperature in Boston went up. And so you suspect the average snowfall in Boston went down, but it didn't. It went up. Yes, it got warmer and snowier. How does that happen? Well, what's happening with the increased greenhouse gases and the warming, which is most pronounced in the higher latitudes, okay, up in the polar regions. Even within our area, there's been a more significant warming compared to long-term averages in northern New England than in southern New England. That hasn't been great for skiing, by the way, as just one aside there, okay? So that's how we kind of realize that. We're looking at what's happening and where, and we realize that there's more warming in the higher latitudes. So what has that been causing? It's been causing the jet stream, the band of strong winds, 30, 40,000 feet up, to change somewhat on average. We know how weather mostly moves from west to east. So that would mean high above us, when the winds are stronger, they're blowing from west to east, or roughly. Sometimes northwest to southeast, sometimes southwest to northeast, but generally with a westerly component. And when everything is moving from west to east, we call that a zonal flow. That would mean the bitter cold would be up, in the Arctic regions, and normal cold would be in the mid-latitudes where we are, and normal warm would be in the southern latitudes. But the increased warming, being most pronounced at higher latitudes, has caused the jet stream to buckle. Instead of it moving, on average, more smoothly from west to east, there's more undulations, all right? And when you get dips or troughs, you tend to get storms. And some of them can be stronger, slower moving, means they're producing more moisture. But if you're under what we call the ridge, those are areas of high pressure, and you can get longer and warmer stretches of warm and dry weather. So that's how you can have one part of the country, being way above normal in precipitation, and another part being very dry. So the extremes, again, are always problematic. Different kinds of extremes cause different kinds of problems, but they all cause problems, all right? But let's get back to this. All right, so there's Worcester, where their seasonal average is 64, and 58.7 is what they had of those two storms, almost their normal. Boston was above it. So why was it even more, you might say, extreme compared to the averages in Boston? Because this was a cold pattern. And when it's a very cold pattern, you may often get your heavier snowfall near the coast, all right? If it's not as cold a pattern and it's more borderline, that's where you're going to see the heavier snows in the Worcester Hills and the Berkshires, and it may even be rain along the coast, all right? This was not like that. This was the kind of situation that brings the most severe winter snow conditions right along the coastline. Because remember, the coastline also has to deal in these strong storms with wind, coastal flooding, beach erosion, okay? Now that I mentioned that, let me mention this. Our sea level has slowly been rising, okay? Now, just consider this. If sea level is somewhat higher than it used to be, even if the storms of today and tomorrow are the same as the storms of the past, coastal flooding and beach erosion might be a little bit worse because sea level is higher to begin with. But now, due to the warming in the oceans, the storms themselves may be somewhat stronger than they used to be. So higher sea level to begin with, somewhat stronger storms, that's a compounding effect. Beach erosion, coastal flooding can be more pronounced. And believe it or not, I read somewhere, roughly it's 50 or 55% of the population in the United States lives within 50 or 55 miles of the coast. Can you imagine that? Even though by land, most of the land is away from the coast, much greater than the amount along the coast, but it's very desirable. A lot of people love to be near the ocean. There's lots of beauty there and all that, and obviously increasing risk. So that is the point. And when we think of the number of structures along the coast, much greater than decades ago. When we think of the number of people living near the coast, or along, much higher than decades ago. So rising sea level, potential for storms to be even stronger, more people and property in harm's way. Does that add up to some concern? I'd argue yes. Okay? So that's to keep that in mind as well. All right. So now let's talk about the snowiest 30 days that we've ever had. So it was a record in Boston, 58.8 inches, and it broke the record by some ridiculous amount. Well, that's the 30-day, whatever. I mean, it's unbelievable. So, right, so if you go to the 30 days ending February 7th, that's the one on the left, that's the first two storms. If you go 30 days ending February 21st, now you've got all four storms in there, all right? And that breaks the record for the amount of snow within 30 days by 35.6 inches. So here's another way to look at climate change. The idea that it appears to be getting increasingly difficult to have long, continuous winters, okay? Not saying they'll never happen, but not likely with much frequency. But, okay, here's the thing, not likely, okay? But when we talk about intense winter weather periods within the winter, an intense period of winter weather within a winter, but not the entire winter, that is possible and seems to be happening. And with the buckling of the jet stream, it can. So in other words, we may be moving toward a feast or famine. Maybe less small little snows. Either you get big ones or you don't get much. The last couple of winters, we didn't get much. I'm not sure yet what will happen this winter, yet, like I might ever know for sure. But just a quick little thing. We're going into what we call a La Nina pattern. There's El Nino and La Nina. What are those things? They have to do with ocean water temperatures in the eastern equatorial Pacific, like off the coast of Peru. Tends to cycle into warmer than normal ocean water, colder than normal ocean water. And that seems to have an effect on the jet stream as well. And when you're in a La Nina, which is a cooling of those ocean waters, it seems to affect the jet stream in a way that the southeast U.S. is very warm, warmer than normal. The Great Lakes or maybe the Plain States could be colder than normal. In the Northeast, this would make sense. It's a little tougher to say because we've seen La Nina winters be colder than normal in northern New England, warmer than normal in southern New England. It really implies also a lot of rain-snow situations, critical, rain-snow lines within New England, things like that. So that's it. But there are other factors that maybe we don't know about. Sometimes we get into certain blocking patterns in eastern Canada that can be favorable for snow conditions here. There was one La Nina winter, I think it was 95, 96, but we had a blocking pattern in Canada. So even though the storms went toward the Great Lakes, which would put us on the warmer side, because of the cold air in eastern Canada funneling down into New England, those storms were forced to redevelop a little below us, keeping us on the cold side, and we had a very snowy winter. But more often than not with La Ninas, that does not happen. So that alone. And if we do have a warm and mild and not too snowy winter, that would be the third straight, because the last two have not produced much snow around here. Okay, so this just shows you the winter 2014 and 15. Boston with 110.6. The average is like 44. It's showing you how much above normal. So for all these places that are included, Worcester, Providence, Portland, Concord, New York City, Hartford, Albany, Philly, Washington, the biggest departure was in Boston. Now, if you go northward, like Concord, New Hampshire, and Portland, Maine, they got into those snowstorms, but the storms were a little bit too far south and east for them to be in the jackpot. It was such a cold pattern that as you increase your distance north and west of Boston, you get a little drier. So they didn't get as much snow out of the storms. But Boston was really in about the perfect place, all right? Also down toward our South Shore, Cape Cod, even Providence. We're further east than Providence. So they had but not as much as us. And even Worcester, you might say, well, gee, Worcester's such a snowy place with the hilly terrain and it's cold and all that. Yeah, they were well above normal. But we had the biggest departure right in Boston. So this was a pattern that was really classic for Boston to get the major storms. Okay. Oh, gosh. Oh, yeah, so well, I'll just, whatever. So that happens to be on the left. That is me, by the way. Okay, no, it's not my son, it's not my grandson. It's me, okay? And then on the right, it's really this. I just decided to take the toupee off. No, there was no toupee. Anyway, all right, so that's me, by the way, during the blizzard of '78. And that's another thing I could do a whole presentation on that. That was my first winter on Boston television. And my first 25 years in Boston were on Channel 7. And then my last 20 were on Channel 5, okay? So I was extremely fortunate. I mean, you're fortunate to get to Boston if you do what I did for a living. For me, it was like, that would have been the all-time goal. Why? Because it's a large market that has great, interesting, challenging weather, okay? And that's, what I liked. But I could go through a whole story, but I'm not going to do it, about the blizzard of '78. I get a lot of credit for that. I mean, not like causing it or something like that. I don't mean it that way. But I mean, for giving a pretty good idea several days ahead of what was happening when that wasn't the universal forecast that was out there. So you might wonder, oh, what were you, some kind of hotshot? I mean, what did you know that others didn't know? Well, the key to that, believe it or not, goes back to my education. I went to the City College of New York. I'm from New York originally. I'm not a native New Englander, although I've been here half a century now. But I grew up in the Bronx, all right? For anybody that knows New York, around the Pelham Parkway area of the Bronx. Oh, we got one or two. Okay, good. Oh, yeah, hi. It's okay. All right. By the way, I have a big difference, I'll bet, between both of you. All right? Grew up in the Bronx. Hated the Yankees. Now, if you're wondering why, okay? Because when I was a little boy, the New York Giants and Brooklyn Dodgers were two National League teams in New York. They either left in '57 or after '57. I can't remember which, but was it? Yeah, okay. So anyway, but my father was a big sports fan, and he loved to root for the underdog. The underdog was the Brooklyn Dodgers. So we were big Brooklyn Dodger fans living in the Bronx, okay? So since we detested the Yankees, when I moved to New England, becoming a Red Sox fan wasn't too difficult. I was 95% of the way there already because I had the biggest prerequisite, okay? So anyway, so I wound up going to college, commuting college, City College of New York in the School of Engineering and Science, which was a very good school in those days. And meteorology is within the School of Engineering and Science. So I studied very hard, took a lot. It's a lot of physics and math, similar to what an engineer would take. And I managed to get through it, and I wanted to work. I wanted to forecast. I tried the National Weather Service. They weren't hiring. I tried private weather services. They weren't hiring. So I applied to graduate school. They didn't have graduate school for meteorology at City College, so I applied to NYU, New York University. And fortunately, I was accepted, and I wound up getting what they call a research assistantship. So half the time you're taking classes, and half the time you're assisting a professor doing research, all right? So that's what happened with me. But I noticed one of the professors there, his name was Vinny Cardone, all right? This guy was unbelievable. He was pretty young at the time. I mean, he was probably, I'm gonna guess he was between 35 and 40, but he was brilliant, but normal, okay? There aren't that many people like that, okay? He was like a meteorologist, oceanographer, physicist, and mathematician all in one. But he was very human and very approachable. And so while I was in graduate school, a lot of heavy theoretical courses, and I really knew I wanted to go to the practical side of the field. There are many who are drawn toward research, thank God, because they're the heroes of the field that develop the computer models and so on. But I knew I wanted to do day-to-day forecasting, and there was no course like that, no weather forecasting, or what we would call synoptic meteorology class. So I went to Vinny one day, and I said, Vinny, I cannot believe there isn't one forecasting class, not one synoptic meteorology class. I said, my gosh, if you taught that, it would be like the greatest. And he said, oh, I'd be happy to teach a course like that. I said, well, how do I make that happen? He says, why don't you start a petition? So I went around to all my fellow graduate students in meteorology. I got 9 signatures. That was enough. He taught the class. I learned, I think, more in that one class than all the others combined. And one of the big things he taught me, because this was still early in the days of really understanding this, was how things high above really determine what happens down on the surface. So in that era, in the late 70s, most of the forecasters are not going to forecast a snowstorm if there isn't even any sign of a storm on the weather map. These days, I mean, snowfall accumulations, they try to do them 3 days ahead of time. The storm may not even be born for 48 hours, and you're trying to do snowfall accumulations, okay? But the computer modeling has come a long way. It's not perfect, but we've made a lot of strides. But going back then, to be talking about something 3-4 days ahead of time, so I knew there was going to be, at high levels of the atmosphere, a strong disturbance, which is really a pocket of cold air, diving from the Great Lakes toward the mid-Atlantic coast, just below us. And we had bitterly cold air in place. So knowing that, and this was going to be so vigorous a disturbance above, I knew it's going to trigger an incredible storm on the coast. So I was very confident of that. And the storm hit on a Monday into Tuesday, and I wasn't the chief meteorologist at the time, but the chief meteorologist, a few of you may remember this name, Dr. Fred Ward. How many remember that name? Okay, some of you do. All right, now also you have to keep in mind, Channel 7 was the lowest rated of the 3 stations by far back in those days, okay? The early news was more competitive, the 6 o'clock. Do you know why? Because there was a popular show on at 5:30 called Candlepins for Cash. And some people just left the TV on, so the 6 o'clock news did somewhat better. But otherwise, channels 4 and 5, BZ and CVB, were dominating the market. But anyway, Dr. Fred Ward, he's a PhD, okay, in physics. And he actually had a full-time job at Hanscom Air Force Base with the government. And so he had to go out of town for that job late in the week before the blizzard of '78. So I got to do the evening primetime shows on the Thursday and Friday before the storm. Saturday evening, I would have done it anyway. And I started talking it up on Thursday night. On Friday night, I started talking it up even more. And even at my comparatively young age at the time, I still remember catching myself in the middle of talking about this saying, but one must not get too far out on a limb or one may fall off. So I was like, I'm really thinking this is going to happen, but I'm not saying it's certain yet, okay? On Saturday evening, the storm started on Monday. I was sold. And that's what that picture is from. And so here's why I believe. Very nice. When I retired, it was very nice. I mean, I couldn't ask for anything nicer. And I received, a lot of very nice emails from people. And I think in almost 50% of them, people were saying things like, Harvey, I've been watching you, since I saw you forecast the blizzard of 78. Most of them did not see me forecast the blizzard of 78 in real time because the ratings were too low on Channel 7. I know that. However, one of the smartest things I ever did in my life is when I left Channel 7 to go to Channel 5, I made sure I had some of these tapes of my call of the storm. And so every time we'd have an anniversary, like I was recently at Channel 5 when we had the 25-year anniversary of the blizzard of 78, and I got to do a special with somebody that you knew and loved, Dick Albert, okay? And that was great, and we were able to show the clips. And then every 5-year anniversary, we bring it out. And so if you're a fairly regular viewer of Channel 5, you've seen it enough times to realize, and you begin to think, yeah, I saw him do that. But you probably didn't, but that's okay. Anyway, so that's the aside on that. Okay, so that's that one, and there you see me tracking, one of the storms. Also notice the graphics change. I mean, there's so many topics we could talk about. The evolution of forecasting, how the graphics have changed. I mean, those were magic markers. Okay. Allow me one aside, okay, that I think you'll enjoy. Is that okay? Okay. So, before Channel 7, I worked at Channel 12 in Providence, Rhode Island. That was my first full-time job as a television meteorologist, okay? I'd never been on television before. I was a wreck, a real wreck. And that's true, and that's another story for another time maybe. But here's the thing. When you're inexperienced and something goes wrong, you may not handle it that well, okay? Well, in Providence, back in the mid-1970s, we didn't even have the magic markers that you see on the left. We had magnetic stick-ons, okay? And one night, I was doing the weather, and there was dense fog through almost the whole state. So I put the word fog, it's 3 letters, F-O-G, up on the map. It's magnetic stick-on, right over Rhode Island. Now I'm doing the weather on the air, and I'm referring to the fog, and so I go and point to it, and my finger must have touched the F. It falls to the ground. It says OG. It looks ridiculous. I don't know how to handle it. I'm looking at it. I looked at the camera. I looked at it. I looked at the camera, and I said, well, I guess there won't be any effing fog tonight. Oh, my goodness. How could that have happened? And I lasted all those years. Okay, so you enjoyed that? So far, you kind of like me, right? I can change all that in a second. You know how? That never happened. That's a joke. But wait a minute. Here's the better part of it. I ripped the joke off of Dick Albert. Thanks. Could have been worse timing. Could have really spoiled the joke. You know that. So there was one time. Now, of course, I've mentioned Dick Albert. And so here's another. There's so many things. So Dick and I had a chance to work together, okay? Something like that doesn't just happen. What do I mean by that? Well, it never happened before, and it'll probably never happen again. By the way, I understand some of you may not, have to leave at certain points. I understand. It's okay. I never take that personally. Thank you. I'll go on even if there's only one left, so don't worry about it. But anyway, so we competed against each other for a quarter of a century. Dick, the chief meteorologist at WCVB, Channel 5, and I was the chief meteorologist at Channel 7. But what people didn't know, how would they know, is that we actually struck up a pretty nice friendship, all right? Why did that happen? Well, I mean, we both really loved weather ever since we were little kids, all right? Like a kid in a candy store and what we did for a living. And we would see each other at these annual conferences that he would usually go to. And in the earlier years of attending, when things were a little different in the TV industry, we could bring our wives along. The stations paid for everything. We'd go out to dinner. My wife, Lorraine, really liked Dick Albert's wife, Mary Ann, vice versa. They're both in the fields of psychology. We're both in meteorology. So we have a lot in common. And I, by the way, love to play tennis, and I'll play as long until my body corrodes to the point that I cannot. And I never played till I was 34, okay? I was never even introduced to the game. Not that many were playing tennis in the Bronx when I was a kid. So turned out, I find out that Dick was the captain of his high school tennis team in Newton, okay? So we started to play tennis, like in late mornings during the week occasionally, because we both had hours that were more afternoon and night hours. So we could do that. So we became as friendly as you can become because we were both competing and, like can't say certain things to each other. Like when Channel 5 was going to get their own Doppler radar, he didn't tell me, of course. Can't do that. You still have to, respect your employer, obviously. But the point is, we then got a chance to hook up, so that was really great. But before we ever hooked up, when Dick was the chief meteorologist at Channel 5, another name you'll remember for sure, Bruce Schwegler, was the chief meteorologist at Channel 4, and I was the chief meteorologist at Channel 7. And we were invited to the Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency. That's MEMA, and it's located in Framingham, to give a presentation before the hurricane season on hurricanes. And the three of us all had a chance to speak, okay? And when Dick had a chance to speak, he started with that joke. And it was hysterical. And I said, oh my gosh, I'm going to remember that. I'm going to definitely take advantage of that sometimes. So that's the story, behind, that joke. Anyway, all right, so I've gone all over the place, as I knew I would. Anyway, so that's the story there. And this was forecasting during one of those, during the first one, okay? And you could see that white and purple, that's the snow in Pennsylvania and Ohio. Doesn't look that menacing because the storm was in its developmental stage, but that's the one that became quite a storm. That's just satellite imagery and just showing massive amount of moisture flowing from south to north at high levels with cold air in place at low levels. And that's what gave us, the great storm. And again, this was an incredible nor'easter. So it wasn't just the snow. You're talking about hurricane force gusts at Nantucket and Chatham and Hummerock. 74 miles per hour or greater is considered hurricane force. But you could see where southeastern Mass and the Cape had the very strongest winds, but Boston gusted to 45 miles per hour. So there were real problems on the Cape because it was a heavier, wetter snow there. That, with the wind, there were lots of power outages down there. And these were some of the snowfall amounts that we were receiving. You can see Sharon with 31 inches, Plymouth 28, Ipswich 26, and Boston at that time had almost 2 feet. And this was amazing because there was also a band of heavy snow, kind of between Metro West and Worcester. So Auburn had the amazing amount, Acton, Framingham, Worcester. I mean, this is incredible stuff. I mean, look at the amount of snow you're talking about, okay? This is what it looked like on a map. And there was that very heaviest band from Metro West to Worcester, down into northwest Rhode Island and up to the interior part of the Merrimack Valley. Now, notice, normally, of course, in a course of a winter most of the time, Concord, New Hampshire is going to have a lot more snow than Boston. Not in this storm, because they were a little farther away from the core of the heavy snow. They were too far north and west. Look at Hartford, okay? Only 7.8 inches. So this was a central and eastern and southeastern New England blizzard, okay? Notice there's also a red area down around Plymouth and Duxbury and Marshfield, okay? That's another area that had over 30 inches of snow. So that was the first one, and I think of the four, that was the most powerful and the most impactful. But the problem is the additional storms came with this already on the ground. This started without anything on the ground, all right? Okay. So, and this is somebody, you know, at the time, 9:30 a.m., January 27th. At that time, almost 26 inches on the ruler in Acton. Storm wasn't over yet. There's another one. This time it's up to 30 inches. Same place. That's what it looked like. Not very similar to the last two winters, you know, at all. So that was in East Cambridge. Okay, remember this was during, you know, this was a Super Bowl run, okay? So people were getting creative with all the snow that they had, all right? And people were baking, you know, these wonderful cakes with lots of icing. I mean, of course, that's somebody's deck and deck table and railings and all of that. And there's a just about buried car in Uxbridge. By the way, it says courtesy of Marilyn Armstrong. Okay, so again, I'm going way back here. In my Channel 7 years, for the first half of it maybe, there was a reporter named Gary Armstrong, all right? That was his wife who took that picture. So this was the second storm, and you look at it and go, wow, what a puny storm compared to the first one. But if you look at an average winter, that's a lot of snow out of a snowstorm, and that was on top of what had already fallen, okay? Once again, you see there was an area from the North Shore to Boston and the nearby South Shore. That was a jackpot. Sometimes one of the jackpots. Sometimes that happens if the wind direction is just right, like north-northeast, and that's cold air coming over the water, and that can either cause an ocean effect or an ocean enhancement of an already snowy event. So that probably contributed. That's just looking, again, satellite on the right. And now we get to the third storm, okay? And this is a real eastern Massachusetts special, right? The North Shore, Boston, and the South Shore. That's where you had 20 to 30 inches of snow. As nearby as Providence, 7.4 inches of snow. Similar in Hartford, much less in Portland and Concord, New Hampshire, and even Worcester, significantly less than Boston, all right? Again, you have to be in a very, very cold pattern, so you don't have to worry about the rain-snow line at all. And in cases like that, that's where eastern, coastal, southeastern New England gets the heaviest amounts. All right, so now we start running into problems with all this snow and ice. All right, so, and we're reporting on these things. If snow depth gets greater than the height of, you know, the venting from your heating system, then you have the risk of carbon monoxide poisoning and death. So you have to make sure where it's venting, where your furnace vents out, if you have a furnace, that the snow level is below it and stays below it, okay? By the way, I believe we lost 14 lives in the blizzard of '78 in cars from carbon monoxide poisoning. If those of you who can remember back or were here and old enough, you may remember early in the blizzard of '78, 2 tractor trailers jackknifed along the exit, Route 138 Canton exit. It backed things up. The snow quickly got heavier. Then the cars had nowhere they could go. Some people tried to leave the cars and find a neighborhood and knock on a door. Some stayed in their cars, and what they would do, undoubtedly, is occasionally run the engine for warmth. But once the snow level gets above the exhaust pipe, trouble. And so that was one of the tragedies of it. Okay, so I mentioned, you see both are mentioned there, both the heating system, dryer events, if you have like a gas dryer or something, that's another one. Ice dams and roof collapses. Okay, that happens if you have a lot of snow or a moderate amount of snow on the roof, especially if you have a side of your house where a gutter is that doesn't get that much sun. You know, there may be a little melting during the day, and then it refreezes, so you start to form those icicles. But the point is, water will go wherever it can find a place to go. And sometimes there's no other place to go, but it starts coming inside the windowsills or the ceiling or It can make stains on the ceiling, or in worse cases, it starts literally coming in the house. So we had some of those with that. You can imagine Boston side streets, what that was like. And also clearing fire hydrants, which obviously is very, very important in case there are fires. And where do you put it all, especially the narrow streets of Boston? Okay, so this was showing roof collapse concerns. It was showing how much water was in the snowpack. You can see 6 to 8 inches of water. We don't have Cape Cod on here, but it was higher down toward the Cape. And that's why that was the greatest incident of roof collapses. Now, some people, you could see this, let's see if this works. Sometimes, oh, look, it does. See the red dot? Okay, so look at this. Look at the icicles, all right? And you know what that's gonna mean, ice dams and problems inside your home. So some people would get up there and try to, they usually say with a rake, near the, where the roof meets the gutter, try to rake some of that snow off. Of course, if it's sheer ice, you're not going to be able to do it. Some people were doing things on their own, and some didn't fare so well. So you got to know what you're doing. So this was, at the time, I guess this was on, somebody sent me maybe Twitter or email, I don't remember. Dave in Framingham. Harvey, I appreciate your encouragement of roof snow clearing. I suggest you also add commentary on possible perils. Okay? Okay, that's a good sense of humor or plea. This was Arlington. Yep, that's another one. All right. And then, okay, so this one was just before the last of the 4 storms, which was Valentine's weekend. All right. And that occurred on a Saturday night and Sunday. Where the Sunday morning had the real band of heavy snow. We don't need to look at this, it's too technical. But I don't know if you're even able to see it, but this is what the kind of maps that meteorologists look at. So the low pressure area is right here. Here's Massachusetts, okay? So remember, it's east of it. We're on the cold side of the storm, close enough to get the heavy snow. We call these isobars, lines of constant pressure. The tighter they are, the less spacing, the stronger the winds. All right, now the interesting thing is, with technology, hopefully more is gained than is lost, but sometimes something is gained and something is lost. We don't really show these kind of maps on the air. There's many other things we can show that the average person can relate to more. What we call weather weenies, they love these kinds of maps, but if you're a meteorologist and you do this, the news director is gonna call you in and say, hey, I know you really get a kick out of this, and I know 1% of the viewers do, but the masses don't. So show things that they, that they understand. But in any event, so with this storm, there's the storm, and again, there's the coastline. So that's a classic for, the cold and the heavy snow to be there. This is the center of the high pressure area. So everything is cold in between the storm and the high pressure area. Now this was really weird. This was a storm where a model that we used at the time was suggesting a break. It was suggesting on Saturday evening, February 14th, there would be several inches of snow, then a break, and then kind of a backlash on Sunday. That doesn't happen very often. So as a forecaster, even if you forecast it, you'll have your heart in your mouth a little bit, okay? Because you're forecasting, a big snowstorm, and what if it's a bust? It can happen. So it not only had a break in the precipitation, people were sleeping though, 3, 4 in the morning on Sunday, February 15th. The stars are out. It's like clear. And, I'm even wondering, oh my gosh, But, say it says clear sky in New Bedford. The first band of snow had lifted to the north. And now we had the second band that a lot of our models were showing was going to move up like this and get the area. Okay, there we go, clear skies. Okay, so this was another thing, all right. So, yeah, I forgot about this. So during this incredible stretch, probably the nicest thing is I got to work with Cindy Fitzgibbon for one morning because we're like the opposite ends, okay? By the way, Cindy, when I left, shortly thereafter, Cindy was named chief meteorologist, which I thought was an awesome decision by the station. She is great. She's a terrific meteorologist, wonderful person, great personality, works very hard. She's a terrific mom. Her husband is a sports photographer at WBZ and really covers the Patriots a lot. So I don't know how they juggle everything, but they do. So I should say that during this particular winter, or during this period of time, I believe I worked 26 days in a row, and I believe in each of the storms, they, what I call, rocked me around the clock. So that means I was on virtually everything, at night and in the morning, all right? Now, I'm very motivated and into these storms, and I drew upon my father's experience. He was not a meteorologist. He was in the bakery business in New York, a middleman. That means he didn't bake the products, but he delivered them and had massive customers in all the boroughs. I don't know how he ever did it, but he worked like 16 hours a day, 6.5 days a week, and in all the elements, whether he was sick or not. So I figured if he could do that, I mean, I'm kind of lucky. So I have to do all those hours, but it's really a white-collar job, okay? Blue-collar job, certainly physically, is really much more demanding. So I figured if he could do that, I could do this, plus it's something I love. Here's the problem. If you're on the air and you are truly suffering from sleep deprivation, okay, your inhibitions are bye-bye, out the window. Anything could come out of your mouth. And that's what one of the dangers, in my opinion, of having somebody do that, okay? But anyway, I did get a chance to work with Cindy that morning. And then we got a few reports from viewers. Look at the 6:12 a.m., 2 separate flashes of light followed by rumbling. Some of the most intense storms actually produce what we call thunder snow. And we started getting several texts like that. And look at this. This is somebody in Fairhaven at 6:15 a.m., whiteout conditions, didn't let up for 7:45. I cleaned my deck at 6, and 7:45 had 10 to 12 inches in less than 2 hours. That's 5 to 6 inches per hour. So imagine a thunderstorm, but in the winter. You know how much rain a thunderstorm can produce with all that flooding? Well, it's when it's colder, it can never produce that amount of moisture because warm air holds more moisture than cold air, but it still can produce a lot. And that's what's happening when you actually have effectively thunder snow going on. So almost a foot in 2 hours. He said the most snow he's ever seen in a 2-hour period in his 57 years, and he drove through the blizzard of 78. All right, so this was the last and final storm. Once again, it's eastern New England getting the highest amounts, cold pattern, the North Shore, and down around southeastern Mass, the purple. Those were where the heaviest amounts were. Otherwise, Boston would have been the next highest with that storm. So there we go. This is what is unbelievable. For all of I think there's an error in the measurement here, not the measurement of snow, but the conversion of how much water equivalent was in the snow. According to this, Boston goes down for the month of February having 4% more precipitation than normal, even though it's the all-time snowiest stretch and everything like that, okay? How can that be? Yes, it was light, dry, and fluffy snow, but right now, because of expenses, snow used to be measured by human beings, and weather watchers do it. But right now, it's the FAA that's responsible, Federal Aviation Agency, and they're great people, but they don't have the dedication that meteorologists would. So I don't believe that's totally accurate. But the point is that in the Boston area, it was a ton of snow, but it was, colder and drier. So only slightly above normal precipitation, but massively above and record-breaking amount of snow. And this is showing widespread 3 feet or more snow depth, and some more than that. The highest amounts, again, is that purple color right in there, okay? Okay, that's the highest amount. That's somewhere in this range on the ground. That's amazing. All right, a few more pictures of amazing snow drifts or piled up. I mean, where do you put the snow when you shovel it off your walk? When you have a situation like, why did that happen again? Sorry. When you had something like that going on. Look at this. Looks like Nova Scotia, right? You see pictures like that usually in Nova Scotia. And this was two of the storms in Holliston. The one on the left was the first one. The one on the right was the fourth one. Plymouth, okay? By the way, there goes, how many times people have said to, and I understand it because they're reporting from experience, Harvey, why is it that the rain-snow line is always the Cape Cod Canal? It's snowing on one side of the Cape, it's raining on the other. Not always. This is Plymouth, of course, but the Cape was buried, all right? Some more pictures. Here's Sandwich on the Cape, okay? It wasn't raining there. Other people have said, Harvey, how come the rain-snow line is always as you go up Route 2 in Belmont? Now, all these things happen, but not all the time. And you're remembering when it did happen, okay? And so that's human nature. There's ice dams, and boy, then there's ice dams, or a 20-foot icicle. Really nasty stuff. Okay, so we had all the snow and the cold. You don't see this very often. Cape Cod Canal with massive chunks of ice, all right? That's Cape Cod. As we got into March, and the sun angle is getting higher, so you're starting to get a little melting, and it breaks into these massive blocks of ice. That was our weekend meteorologist at the time, Danielle Volmar, who was a chief meteorologist in Nashville, Tennessee for the last 5 years or so. And she was reporting, that's Wellesley and Orleans on the right. You see the chunks of ice. So here you go, normal amount of snow at the time, 43.8. Boston came in with 110.6, number one. Number two was the winter of 95, 96. Number three was the winter of 93, 94. And then we go back to 47, 48. But notice that the snowiest winters, many of them have been more recent, kind of the opposite of what you might suspect since we're getting warmer. But again, it's because the pattern that can produce coastal storms and nor'easters may be happening with a little bit greater frequency because of the shift in the jet stream and things like that, all right? Now, if all of this continues into the indefinite future, some of the snowstorms are eventually going to become rainstorms. That's what would happen going far down the road if nothing else changes and we continue to go the way we're going, okay? But we're still capable for now, I think, maybe not, a winter like that, but so there you go, showing you, as we go month by month, look at that, 2.6, I think that actually was November. So there was a little bit of early snow in Boston. But then look at December, 0.3 of 1 inch. That was it, okay? Then January, with most of it occurring late in the month. February, most of it occurring in the first half of the month. And there was one snowstorm in early March that produced about 9 inches of snow. And that's how we got the 110.6. The other winter that's in number two, very different. More like a cold and pretty snowy continuous winter, okay? Every month above average from this, look at that, even into April. So that was a consistently cold winter. This one was, second half loaded, so to speak. Okay? And this was showing the, again, the variability. And this, what else do you need to know? Just in that 5-year period from 2010 to 2015, Boston's seasonal snowfall goes from a low of 9.3 to a high of 110.6. Well, 81, next winter 9, then 63, 58, 110. So you can see what happens. But because of those winters, now you understand why when the average snowfall from 1980 to 2010 was advanced to 1990 to 2020, then all of these got in there. And that's why the average snowfall in Boston is now considered to be 48 inches. Now, if we keep going the way we've been going this decade, then by the time we get into the next decade, the average is going to go down again. But we don't know what the next 5, 6 winters will bring. Okay, so there it is. This is for the Blue Hill Observatory, which is a great resource, by the way. And there's a Blue Hill Weather Observatory, and it has the longest continuous weather records of anywhere in the country, okay, uninterrupted, and it's one of the best places to see the climate change signal because they've been measuring in the same place for all these since, I think, 1871. Anyway, so for them, it was number one. Also 95, 96 were number two. The reason why their amounts are higher, elevation, 600 feet up. Generally gets colder with elevation. But again, you're seeing, except for 47, 48, the third one, you're seeing that they're all comparatively, more recent. Weather extremes, remember, weather extremes, as long as we're occasionally cold enough, it can include big snowstorms. Worcester, their normal average is 64.1. They were not their snowiest winter on record. That one was 95, 96 for them, all right? And they're 1,000 feet up, Worcester Airport, and that's where all these measurements are taken. But for them, again, everything is since 1990. All right, then we were getting these frost quakes, which gets a little technical, but people were hearing very loud bangs with all this snow and the bitter cold and everything. That's what happens. Anyway, so it sounds like, it's just loud cracks, okay? And some of it has to do with what's going on with the wood, all right, that's actually causing that to happen. It has to be pretty unique conditions with all that snow and very cold temperatures. See, it actually said it right here. Has to do with shrinking wood. That's basically the idea about it. Yeah, the sounds are like a roof is collapsing, so it's very scary. You have all this snow on the roof, and you hear this, and you get very scared. But they're not actually dangerous in and of themselves. See, my entire neighborhood has the same concerns. Has anybody complained about ice quakes? So we got a lot about that. Okay, now comments from people. This just shows you the way it is, okay? Everybody is not going to love you. Everybody is not going to hate you, all right? Is it necessary to torture shut-ins with 24 hours of weather reporting about to commit suicide? That's pretty extreme. I do not understand the need to report on the fairly obvious snow, wind, maybe freezing rain. As viewers stuck at home, there's nothing more boring. I shut my TV off after the second report, so ill-advised. We live in New England, it snows. How boring to listen to you all day. Okay? So, I read them. I go into my cubby hole. I hibernate. No, I mean, I don't blame anybody here. First of all, remember the level of interest in weather is very variable. People are variable. Their lives are variable. Who knows what's going on? So you get that, all right? So you do get some of that. Is there a chance to watch scheduled programming instead of continuous broadcasting of the weather that keeps going over the same thing every minute? Is it really necessary to have coverage all day when we have these storms? We can look outside and see what's going on. An hourly update would work, but constant coverage is not necessary. Okay? And the coverage goes on and on and on. And by the way, I have to tell you this. There are always going to be a segment of people that will stay with the coverage forever. And so every station is worried that if they go off the air, then people who are watching them will say, well, maybe the other stations are still covering it. So it becomes a game of chicken. And very often you're on the air, probably too long. But, okay, I think this is the last one. Do you really have to interrupt programming every half hour? It's snowing, we know that. In half an hour, it'll still be snowing. Same story, half hour from that. Unless there's some actual news, let us enjoy watching something besides the weather. We can always look out the window if we want to be reminded of the snow. And that was my wife, Carol. No. First of all, my wife's name is Lorraine. So, but there were some nice ones. I want to say how much I enjoy. Oh, thank you very much. My favorite weather is always on the mark, and not an easy job. I just want to thank. Quick note, say CVB, again, did a wonderful job forecasting the blizzard, providing outstanding coverage and information. Harvey, the other meteorologist, Tyron Houston, should be proud. In Harvey, we trust. It's comforting to hear the voice of experience and expertise in forecasting New England's weather. Oh, we love, isn't this nice? It's an awesome weatherman. Okay, you can read these. Okay, I mean, I outdid myself. I think the atmosphere outdid itself. Anyway, so there are nice ones, which are very rewarding. Even mentioning you must be exhausted, which is very kind. Okay, so notice this tie, all right? See this? It has snowflakes on it. Now, I had a tendency, if I was either forecasting snow or covering a snowstorm, to wear a tie that had snowflakes on it. So that prompted this. We notice you continue to wear your snowflake tie. This could perhaps be our jinx. Please get rid of it. Thank you, your loyal viewers from Leicester. Harvey, I think you should stop wearing the snow tie. You're jinxing us. So, there it is. Some blame Harvey's. That was Heather Unruh, who was anchor at the time for us, saying some blame Harvey's tie for Snowmageddon. Should he retire it at 11? Some might have said he should retire at 11. But I didn't for like 7 more years. You covered 78 in this winter. You can retire saying you've seen it all. I did think about that. Maybe this is a good time. I have to admit, I wrote back. That thought's entered my mind. Anyway, this gets into a few fun facts. 1 billion cubic feet of snow fell on Boston, more than twice the amount of dirt moved during the 15-year Big Dig project. How about that? The city plowed 295,000 miles of roadway, roughly 12 trips around the earth. Boston removed 30,000 truckloads of snow. The city melted 50,000 tons of snow at snow farms. Okay? I know life has to go on, but to me there's something sacrilegious, right? Mother Nature put it there and Mother Nature will take it away. But I know we live in a modern society and, even if we've had 4 feet of snow, we got to get to the mall in 5 minutes, right? So, that's the thing. And this was St. Patrick's Day snowman, right? Because there still was a good deal of snow on the ground. And these were the top 10 snowstorms. 2 of them made it in there. The first one and the second one, and the third one. The first one was January 26, 24.6. Third one, 23.8. By the way, what's number one, it's very deceiving. This 27.5 that was called the President's Day storm. Impact-wise, not even close. Blizzard of 78, way, way more than that. But, by the way, another memory. This is the April Fool's storm. Can you imagine that? 25.4 inches of snow. 4th snowiest storm ever in Boston occurs on April 1st. Okay? And look at that little patch of snow on April 20th in Lunenburg. So that's it. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed hearing it as much as I enjoyed telling it, because it's also kind of sentimental for me, as well. And okay, so the final thing I'm going to say is the last big snowstorm that I covered was January 28th and 29th of 2022. As a matter of fact, that's the last real big snowstorm we've had, okay? So maybe you can start to realize that as long as I'm not on the air, you're safe, all right? But anyway, that forecast turned out well. And we did wind up with about 22 inches in Boston. It was a late Friday night, mostly Saturday storm. And thankfully, the forecast turned out well. So again, I was on at night, I was on in the morning. And I remember, as I'm sleeping for 1 hour in what we call the green room, saying to myself, you're now 73 years old. I think you're a little old for sleepovers. Okay? So then I realized, I think, I'm going to be probably retiring very soon. So then I said, oh God, just let this forecast be right. Because there was one point I started getting nervous. Maybe the heavier snow is going to shift south. And I go, I'll never forgive myself for staying this long if this ever turns out to be a bust. Thank the Lord it didn't. And so when I was doing some live coverage during the day of the storm, I think it was with Mike Wonkum around noontime, 1, 2 in the afternoon. I'm exhausted to begin with. And this promo comes on the air. It was so powerful, it almost bowled me over. It said, he forecast it in 78, and he did it again in 22. Harvey Leonard, the dean, whoa, and I said to myself, what is behind? There's got to be one of 3 things. The station's either saying, don't get any ideas, you can't retire, all right? Or it's saying, take the hint. You did great in 78. You did great in 22. It's like 44 years apart. Take the hint and retire. Or the third thing it could have been is the storm was happening just at the beginning of the major February ratings period. That was the reason for it, okay? It didn't have anything to do with the other two. But anyway, so thank you for that. And I hope that even though I didn't do the visuals on it, that you got the flavor of climate change and the idea that I wanted to get across to you, as well as thinking back to this winter. And for those of you who can still stay a little while longer, I'll take any comments or questions that you may have. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Thank you for your presentation. We've all heard about and seen examples of misinformation about climate change.
Yes.
And the latest hurricanes, the Democrats are. What do you, in your opinion, what's the best response to that sort of?
Okay, great question about misinformation. Some saying, oh, the Democrats are causing these storms over Florida. First of all, I have to say that's a ridiculous statement. It's obviously the meteorologists. No, I'm kidding. Kidding. No, I mean, I don't care where anybody falls politically. That's moronic in terms of intelligently, okay? Nobody can do that, all right, number one. So it's just ludicrous. If I could just say, no matter what you wind up doing and voting or whatever it is, it's just, and I'm not the only one. The disinformation is just beyond imagining. I never imagined we'd ever have anything like this in this country. I really didn't. And what's sadder, roughly, is half the country either falling for it, believing it, or whatever. It's just unbelievable to me. It really is. It's just, I don't even know what to say. And what was it? There was somebody, they arrested somebody who was going to try and shoot FEMA workers. I mean, who are trying to help people. I mean, this is unimaginable. So, it's like words do have consequences, Elections have consequences. Words have consequences. And for anybody who intentionally, and there are a lot, in my opinion, does this massive disinformation, that is just really so sad and very un-American, in my opinion. Yes. Wow. Yeah, I know. Yes, talking about going into the roof and trying to build supports, because, yes, with all that snow and you're hearing these noises, God forbid you think the house is about to collapse, okay? But it had to do with the expansion of the wood that really is related to that. It's very unusual, and obviously it takes extreme winter circumstances, to create that. Okay, do we have any? Yes?
This has to do with Hurricane Milton.
Hurricane Milton.
I was surprised that it spun off so many tornadoes.
Yes.
I don't remember that happening with other hurricanes.
Okay. Actually, tornadoes are common with tropical storms and hurricanes, usually in the right-hand quadrant. And this was, in the right-hand quadrant, but actually removed a bit in distance. So the storm is approaching the west coast of Florida, which is going to take the worst storm surge and the heaviest rain. But yet the tornadoes are occurring over southeastern Florida, all right? Now, it is normal, but most of them are, any tornado, of course, is dangerous. Most of them are mini tornadoes. These were major, a few of them, and that's pretty unusual. So I'm sure there's going to be some meteorological studying go into that. But again, it's such a warm and humid environment on the eastern side of a tropical storm or a hurricane. Yeah, and that was terrible because more lives were lost that way. I could tell you something else, just remembering back to Hurricane Bob, which occurred in 1991 and caused a lot of coastal flooding around Cape Cod. Up this way, we were on what we call the rainier side of the storm. Yes, it was windy, but not really super damaging winds. 3 to 6 inches of rain, some localized flooding, wasn't the end of the world. But we did have the storm surge on Cape Cod, and I remember riding along Falmouth Heights Beach Drive, whatever, and the seawall, what was the seawall, were blocks of concrete on the road, okay? That takes amazing force, but that's rushing water, rushing ocean water with incredible surge and waves on top. It's just gonna mow down anything, in its path. So, yeah, I mean, that's another thing, we could talk about. Really concerns me. I don't know when it'll ever happen. I know it will, unfortunately. But the worst natural disaster that ever hit New England was a hurricane in 1938, which means that the only people, who are still alive, and even if they were little kids then, are 90 years old or more now. So that means most of the population really has no idea anything like that can happen here. And if it happened once, it can and will happen again. It's not an accident. It means that the combination of conditions in the atmosphere come together and search a way to do that. Maybe less frequency than other things, but it means it can. And people would have no idea what hit them because, power would be out in most of New England on up into eastern Canada with so many trees blocking everything. There's no way to quickly fix that, as we're seeing in parts of Florida and the Carolinas, from true catastrophes. By the way, the hurricane of 38, the highest wind gust atop Blue Hill, keep in mind that 155 miles per hour or higher is a Category 5, the highest category. Blue Hill had a peak wind gust of 186 miles per hour. Now, you might also say, how could it be that strong up here? Our waters are cooler than down there. Good point. So what happens is, the classic case for us, the disaster, is a strong hurricane that is somewhere around the Bahamas, and the jet stream forces it to move northward, okay? Now, where these storms form in the tropics, the prevailing wind is east to west, so they normally move to the west. Sometimes they keep moving to the west. They go to like Mexico, even Central America. But there's also another jet stream up here, and if that jet stream dips down far enough, it can capture that, okay? It's like, imagine, not that we would do it at this point, but white water rafting, okay? And you're going along, all right? And you look up ahead and you see there's one stream like that and one like that. You're right in the middle. You have no idea where you're going to be, but you're going to be in two very different places depending on which river of water captures you. Well, there are rivers of air in the atmosphere, the jet stream. And sometimes it could just get picked up by what we call the northern jet stream. And if there's a sharp dip and trough in the east, it's going to move from south to north. And sometimes it does it with great speed. And if it moves so quickly, then it has very little time over the slightly cooler waters north of North Carolina. And so that storm in 38 went from off the Carolina coast into Long Island and the south coast of New England in 6 to 8 hours. And it wasn't expected that that was going to happen. So 500 to 600 people were lost along the south coast of New England, 20 feet of water in downtown Providence. A hurricane barrier has since been erected to try to protect New Bedford and Providence. That's just, Yes. Right, that's correct. People on Long Island, as well as the south coast of New England, didn't really have much idea, or if any, that was coming. It was known there was a storm, and so what prediction there was is that it would curve out to sea like most of them do. Right. Yeah. Right. And that's happened. There also was a story, so that was 38, but as recently as 69, Hurricane Camille near the Gulf Coast. And again, there was FEMA people, civil defense people going door to door telling people to evacuate. And of course, some people, would say, I'm not going anywhere, I leave it in God's hands. Whatever God's will is, okay? This is a difficult situation. There's religion and belief in religion. There's also science. And so, this is what happens. And all you can do, can you let me know your next of kin so we can notify them or, whatever. So there was one apartment complex called the Richelieu Apartments. 24 people stayed to have a hurricane party. And one baby survived and in a limb of a tree or something. They were all gone. 6-story apartment, so you remember it, yeah. So, I hope we didn't lose people that way, but I know there was even in Florida. Now, I'm going to say something, so understand this and try to imagine the position that was in. Okay, so we had Hurricane Milton following Helene, all right? Helene, I believe, did hit as a Category 4, and in the panhandle of Florida, there was an area that had a brutal storm surge. The rest of the story was the fact as the storm moved inland rapidly with massive amounts of moisture, that doesn't go away even if the wind field decreases some, and caused the massive flooding. Also, when air goes uphill, okay, more moisture is wrung out of the atmosphere. So the east and southeast winds are going up the mountains in North Carolina, enhancing the rainfall. And they had just had, having nothing to do with the storm, what we call a predecessor heavy rain event. So they already had heavy rain, the ground was saturated, and now this massive amount of rain came with enough wind to cause some damage as well. And it's just horrible. I was in Asheville about a little less than a year and a half ago. Now, you'll never believe the reason I was in Asheville. I'll tell you, but you won't believe it. It was for a 6th grade reunion. So the elementary school that I went to in the Bronx, PS 97, from K through 6, it was a real neighborhood school, and we were really a close-knit group. And, a lot of us have stayed in touch and have had some of these reunions. So the person who was hosting it lived in Asheville. So, I went to Asheville. He is okay. I've been in touch with him. But anyway, incredible town, great, beautiful artsy town, and really, it just, it's heartbreaking. There's no two ways about it. Yes. 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 So the question is, do meteorologists have an opinion of whether, what seems to be extreme weather events is being influenced by climate change, increased greenhouse gases, and so on? I will say that one of the more resistant groups to that, maybe like about 10 years ago, were TV meteorologists, okay? That has changed quite a bit, since then, all right? And I know I myself, to be very honest with you, the first year I started on television was in Providence, Rhode Island. So I remember 2 things. One, being a nervous wreck. And 2, I remember an edition of Time magazine in 1974, which the cover said, "The Ice Age cometh." There actually was a bit of cooling in the 60s into the 70s. But since then, every decade has been warmer than average by an increasing amount. Very concerning. And if I went through some of the climate change slides I have, you'll see the increase in carbon dioxide, and then you look at the temperatures, and it's very similar. Very strong suggestion that there's a direct relationship, somewhat of a direct relationship. That the polar ice caps are melting? Oh, and Mars. Oh, you're getting into the weather on Mars now. Yeah. Okay. I'm not sure because I haven't spoken to anybody living on Mars recently. No, that's a joke. I am not really qualified to answer that. I haven't studied the atmosphere of other planets like in any great way to know that. But no, I don't really think that there would be a correlation between what's happening in Mars and what's happening. Well, when you say universally, we're really, we're talking about our planet, but I mean, Mars is, I don't think the universe is so vast, okay? And, we don't have people in Mars, burning coal, oil, and natural gas, and stuff. So I don't know. That can be totally different. But, yeah, I mean, there's so many related fields, to meteorology and forecasting, obviously environmental science. You can go on and on, obviously, yes. Okay, we'll take you first.
What's your prediction for this winter?
What is my prediction for this winter? Well, that's a good question. And I better think of something in the next 3 days because I'm going to be emceeing a conference, a Southern New England weather conference, which is happening near Blue Hill on Saturday. It's actually happening at Meditech in Canton, okay? So if any of you are super weather enthusiasts and you want to attend, you could go to bluehill.org and there'll be a link and all sorts of information on this. So you can look at it and look at the topics and say, that's way too technical for me, that's not for me. Or, hey, I think I might learn something. Anyway, so I'm doing that. But I'm on a panel at the end of the conference with a few other people about what the winter may bring. So all I can say is this cyclical ocean water temperature pattern off the coast of Peru is cycling toward what we call a La Nina, which is cooling of the ocean waters there, which usually has an effect on the jet stream, which usually means a warmer than average winter in the east or the eastern third or quarter of the country. However, there's always a however, we're in New England. The one complicating factor has to do with whether there is occasional blocking in Canada. Sometimes we get high pressure areas near Greenland, and then storms that come from, let's say, the Gulf Coast to the Great Lakes. Normally we'd be on the east and warm side of those storms, but if we have blocking high pressure in eastern Canada that, ridges down into New England, then the storms try to go to the Great Lakes, but then reform along the coast below us, and we're still cold, and we can get snow. The second snowiest winter, I think it was 95, 96, was a La Nina winter, but it had the blocking in Canada, okay? That stayed really for the whole winter, so it wound up being a snowy winter. But most of the La Ninas are usually below normal snowfall compared to the average, and that gets more and more pronounced the farther south you go along the East Coast. Now, of course, the amounts are less in average sense anyway, but they go even, like Washington, D.C. is not likely to have much snow at all, because sometimes they can get a few snowstorms in the winter season. That would be the thing. Yes?
When you were growing up in New York, do you remember a quote-unquote meteorologist, Mr. Weatherby?
Okay, that's a great one. Okay, listen, I have such amazing proof that I'm an old person. You wouldn't believe it. What is the proof? Every time somebody asks a question, my inkling is to say, that reminds me of a story. Because you have your life's experiences to draw upon. So those who can still stay, 2 or 3 more minutes. The question was about, do I remember somebody in New York, something about Uncle Wedby? Okay, so I do. And the name was Tex Antoine. He presented the weather back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, but his real prime was on NBC in the 50s into the 60s, okay? He wore a smock. He was very artistic. A great communicator, very artistic. In my opinion, the most talented weather communicator I've ever seen, okay? He was funny, but I mean, he was also, he gave a discussion about, storm here, whatever. Then he would do the commercial himself, and then after the commercial, he would do the actual forecast. Well, here's what he would do with the commercials. He could do things like this, okay? Turn a smiling lady's face into a cup of Savarin coffee effortlessly. Sometimes the other way around, all right? It was very artistic. But there are 2 things that I have to share with you, okay? Remember, I'm a little kid, I'm growing up in New York, and I love snowstorms. They don't happen every day, or even every winter, good ones. So he's on the air, I'm watching him, and all he's got is this cardboard, he's got an easel, and like a magic marker. And he's doing the weather, and he puts an H in southern Canada. He does that. He looks and he says, cold high to the north. This is in the winter. Then he puts an L in the Gulf of Mexico, and he goes, warm low to the south. And then he goes, heh, 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 heh. Well, I don't know if anybody else knew what that meant, but I did. He's talking to me. That means that's going to come up the coast, bump into the cold air, and we're going to have a big snowstorm, okay? Which we did. Okay, that's one thing I remember. The other thing is he often started with a saying, okay? Now, I'm going to tell you something that happened like more than 60 years ago, and this is how I remember it. I'm walking home from middle school or high school, 14 or 19 blocks, depending on which school. It's the day before Thanksgiving. The sky's a leaden gray. It's cold. It feels like snow. It looks like snow, kind of smells like snow. It does not snow. I turn Tex on that evening, and he begins this way. I must admit, the feeling of snow was in the air, but you'll have to admit, snow for Thanksgiving is kind of rare. He's talking to me. He's not talking to anybody else. He's talking to me. That's amazing, okay? And look, I remember it word for word more than 60 years later. So I would say, I mentioned in graduate school that Professor Vinnie Cardone. So he would basically be the one that influenced me the most through my college experience and through my growing up experience. The meteorologist who influenced me the most would be Tex Antoine. So that's the story there. All right, I know probably, I think, thank you for staying. I think the building was supposed to close 28 minutes ago, so I apologize. But thank you very much. I really appreciate you coming. Thank you.